A desperate leopard mother begged a tourist for help. What happened next was heartbreaking. He thought he was just on a safari, snapping photos in the wild, until a starving leopardess dragged herself onto the road and locked eyes with him. Behind her, two tiny cubs, trembling in the shadows. But this wasn't just a chance encounter. What he didn't know was that danger was closing in fast. Men with guns, secrets in the brush, and a truth more devastating than he ever imagined. Now, this ordinary traveler is forced into an impossible choice. Turn away and stay safe, or stand his ground and risk everything. Why would a wild predator place her final hope in a stranger? And what will it cost him to answer that desperate call? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. Through the dusty windshield of his rented Jeep, Clayton Harlow watched the African sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. His camera lay ready on the passenger seat, waiting to capture another morning in Kenya. 6 months had passed since Sarah's death, but the weight of loss still pressed heavy on his shoulders. The empty seat beside him seemed to echo with memories. Sarah had always wanted to visit Africa. "We'll go someday," they'd said, but someday never came. Now here he was, alone, trying to outrun grief that followed him halfway across the world. Clayton steered the Jeep slowly along the dirt track that bordered the Masai Mara Game Reserve. The morning air flowed through his open window, carrying the wild scents of acacia and sun-warmed earth. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel as his eyes scanned the landscape, searching for something to photograph, something to fill the hollow spaces in his days. The Jeep rounded a bend, and Clayton's foot instinctively hit the brake. There, in the golden morning light, a leopardess stumbled into his path. His heart jumped as the magnificent cat swayed on her feet, then collapsed in front of his vehicle. "Dear God," Clayton whispered, his fingers fumbling for his camera strap. But this wasn't like the other wildlife encounters he'd photographed over the past week. The leopardess's ribs showed clearly through her spotted coat, and dark blood matted the fur along her side. Her eyes, amber and intense, locked onto his through the windshield with an almost human desperation. Clayton's hands trembled as he lowered his camera. Those eyes held something more than animal pain. They carried a message, a plea that cut straight through to his soul. The big cat's chest heaved with labored breaths, and her head dropped to rest on her paws. A soft rustle in the brush beside the road caught his attention. Clayton's breath caught in his throat as two tiny forms emerged from the undergrowth, cubs, no more than a few weeks old. They tottered on uncertain legs, their spotted fur still baby-soft, their small bodies thin with hunger. "Oh no," Clayton murmured, understanding dawning like the sun breaking through clouds. This wasn't just a wounded animal. This was a mother, fighting to keep her babies alive. The cubs pressed close to their mother's side, their tiny mews barely audible through the Jeep's window. The leopardess's tail twitched weakly, and she made a soft chuffing sound that seemed to comfort them. But Clayton could see the truth written in her failing strength. She was dying. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The scene before him stirred something deep in his chest, something that had been dormant since Sarah's passing. He recognized the look in the leopardess's eyes now. It was the same expression Sarah had worn in her final days, fierce love, mixed with desperate worry about leaving those she cared for behind. Clayton sat frozen, torn between his instinct to help and his awareness of wild animals' unpredictability. The leopardess's head turned slightly, her gaze never leaving his face. In that moment, he felt the weight of her trust, the silent understanding passing between them. The morning light strengthened, casting long shadows across the African plain. Birds called in the distance, and a warm breeze rustled through the acacia trees. But time seemed to stand still in this space between human and wild, between life and death, between duty and fear. The cubs huddled closer to their mother, their small bodies shaking. One of them, bolder than its sibling, looked directly at Clayton, with bright, innocent eyes. In that tiny face, he saw all the possibility of future life, all the hope that could be lost if he turned away. Clayton's hand moved to the Jeep's door handle. He knew what Sarah would have done. She had been a teacher, like him, but she'd never hesitated to help when help was needed. The memory of her courage steadied his shaking fingers. "Okay," he whispered, more to himself than to the leopards. Okay. The morning air wrapped around him as he slowly opened the door, careful not to make any sudden movements. The leopardess watched him, but made no attempt to move or protect her cubs. Whether from trust or simply lack of strength, Clayton couldn't tell. Standing beside his jeep, camera forgotten, Clayton faced a moment he never could have imagined when he'd left Kansas seeking escape from his grief. The dying mother, the vulnerable cubs, the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. It all felt like more than coincidence. It felt like purpose. The leopardess's eyes began to close, her breathing growing more labored. The cubs pressed against her, sensing their mother's distress. Clayton knew that whatever he was going to do, he needed to do it soon. These precious lives hung in the balance, waiting for his decision. That Clayton's hands shook as he stepped back toward the jeep's door. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to leave. He was just a tourist, a former history teacher from Kansas who had no business getting involved in something this dangerous. What could he possibly do against poachers? Against nature itself? He reached for the radio mounted on his dashboard, his fingers fumbling with the dial. Static crackled before a clear voice came through. "This is Mara North Station. Over. I'm on the northern boundary road," Clayton said, his voice unsteady. "There's a wounded leopardess here with cubs. She needs immediate help." There was a long pause before the ranger responded, his tone grave. "Sir, we've had reports of poachers in that sector. 3 men, heavily armed. You need to leave the area immediately." Clayton's throat tightened. "But the cubs dash, sir," the ranger cut in firmly. "These men are dangerous. They've already wounded 2 animals this week. Your safety must come first. Clear the area now." The radio fell silent, leaving Clayton alone with the weight of the moment. He looked back at the leopardess, who had managed to lift her head slightly. Those amber eyes bore into him again, carrying the same desperate intelligence he'd seen before. One of the cubs stumbled closer to his jeep, its tiny legs wobbling. The sight made Clayton's chest ache. He thought of Sarah, of how she would have handled this moment. She had always been the brave one, the one who ran toward problems instead of away from them. "I'm sorry," he whispered, gripping his steering wheel. "I'm not qualified for this. I'm not." But the words died in his throat as he watched the mother leopard gather her remaining strength to nuzzle her cubs. The gesture was so tender, so familiar. It reminded him of Sarah in her final days, when even the smallest touch carried all the love she had left to give. The morning sun climbed higher, casting stark shadows across the scene. In the distance, a branch snapped. Clayton's head whipped toward the sound, his heart pounding. Could it be the poachers? The ranger's warning echoed in his mind that he should leave. Every logical thought told him to start the engine and drive away. He could alert more authorities, maybe send help from a safe distance. That would be the sensible thing to do. The leopardess made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. When Clayton looked at her again, he saw the steel snare wrapped around her hind leg, cutting deep into her flesh. His stomach turned at the sight. This wasn't just nature taking its course. This was human cruelty, and these cubs would die because of it. Clayton's fingers tightened on the keys in his ignition. The choice pressed down on him like a physical weight: drive away to safety or stay and face whatever came next. His body trembled with indecision. The bolder cub took another wobbly step toward his jeep, letting out a tiny mew that seemed to pierce straight through Clayton's hesitation. In that sound, he heard everything that was at stake: innocence, trust, the fierce love of a mother, the future of these magnificent creatures. Through the windshield, the leopardess's eyes never left his face. In her gaze, Clayton saw the same question that had haunted him since Sarah's death. When everything you love is threatened, do you run or do you stand your ground? The morning breeze carried the scent of acacia and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out a warning cry. Clayton sat frozen between action and retreat, between fear and compassion, between who he had been and who he might become. The dying mother lifted her head one more time, and in that gesture, Clayton saw all the dignity and desperation of her plea. She had chosen to trust him, to bring her cubs to him in her final hours. Now, he had to choose whether to honor that trust or turn away. His heart pounded against his ribs as another branch cracked in the distance. Time was running out. The decision pressed upon him with increasing urgency: flee to safety or stand his ground and face whatever came next. The weight of choice had never felt so heavy, nor had the consequences seemed so clear. Clayton's hands trembled as he made his choice. With a deep breath that seemed to fill his chest with steel rather than air, he turned the key in the ignition. The Jeep's engine roared to life, echoing across the savannah like a mechanical lion's call. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to the leopards or himself. That he eased the vehicle forward, positioning it sideways between the wounded mother and the direction of the approaching sounds. The leopardess watched him with those intense amber eyes, her trust both humbling and terrifying. The cubs huddled closer to their mother, their tiny spotted bodies pressing against her weakened frame. The morning sun cast long shadows through the acacia trees, and Clayton's heart hammered against his ribs as voices drifted through the brush. Harsh, angry sounds. The words were foreign to his ears, but their meaning was clear enough. The hunters were closing in. Clayton's mind raced. What would Sarah do? She had always been the brave one, the one who knew how to act in a crisis. He glanced at his camera, still hanging uselessly around his neck, then at the Jeep's horn. Maybe he could scare them away. His hand slammed down on the horn, sending a blast of sound across the landscape. Birds exploded from nearby trees in startled flight. The cubs jumped, pressing closer to their mother, who remained eerily still, her breathing shallow and labored. The voices paused, then grew louder, more urgent. They were coming faster now. Clayton grabbed his flashlight, clicking it on and off rapidly, sending strobing beams through the morning haze. His other hand kept hitting the horn in irregular bursts. The noise felt deafening in the previously quiet savannah. Sweat trickled down his back as he scrambled out of the Jeep, keeping low. His hands found rocks on the ground, and he hurled them into the brush away from the leopards, trying to create confusion about his location. The stones crashed through branches with satisfying force. "Come on," he muttered, throwing another rock. "Go away. Just go away." But the footsteps grew closer, and suddenly Clayton saw them. 3 men emerging from the brush like dark specters. Their clothes were dusty and worn, but their weapons gleamed with deadly purpose. The tallest one, his face marked by a long scar, carried a rifle with practiced ease. The sight of them stole Clayton's breath. This wasn't like facing down an unruly student in his classroom back in Kansas. These men killed for a living, and the cold calculation in their eyes told him they wouldn't hesitate to remove any obstacle in their path. The leader, Clayton assumed he must be Baraka, based on the ranger's warnings, raised his rifle. The metal caught the morning light like a snake's scales. "Move," he commanded in accented English. "This is not your business." Clayton's legs wanted to run, but he forced himself to stand straighter. "I've called the Rangers," he said, hoping. His voice didn't shake as much as his hands. "They're on their way." Baraka's laugh was as harsh as the crack of a whip. "The Rangers are very far. You are very alone." He took a step forward, and Clayton could see the decades of cruelty etched into his scarred face. Last chance. Move, or join the leopard. Behind Clayton, one of the cubs mewed softly. The sound struck him like a physical blow, so innocent, so trusting. He thought of Sarah again, of her final days when she had looked at him with such faith, believing he would be strong enough to go on without her. "No," Clayton said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I won't move." The gunshot came without warning. Clayton's side mirror exploded in a shower of glass and metal, the sound so loud it seemed to stop time itself. His ears rang as fragments rained down on the hood of his Jeep. The cubs whimpered. The leopardess tried to rise but collapsed again, her strength fading. Clayton's heart threatened to burst from his chest, but he held his ground. The reality of his situation crashed over him like a wave. He was a middle-aged history teacher from Kansas, standing alone against armed killers in the African bush, but he was also the only thing standing between those cubs and certain death. The only one who could honor the desperate trust the leopardess had placed in him. Whatever happened next, he couldn't let Sarah down again. He couldn't fail another creature who needed him. Baraka worked the bolt of his rifle, chambering another round. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife. His men spread out, moving to flank Clayton's position. The trap was closing, and Clayton knew with terrible certainty that the next shot wouldn't be aimed at his mirror. The standoff stretched like a wire about to snap. Clayton's mind raced, searching for options that didn't end in disaster. Baraka's men continued their slow advance, weapons raised, their intent clear in every measured step. A bird call pierced the tense silence. 3 sharp whistles followed by a trill. Clayton barely registered it as unusual, but the poachers' reactions told a different story. Their heads snapped toward the sound, bodies tensing with recognition. Rangers, one of them whispered, fear threading through his voice. Baraka snarled something in Swahili, gesturing sharply with his rifle. But before he could act, a new voice rang out from behind them. Drop your weapons. The command came in both English and Swahili, strong and sure. Through the morning haze, a figure emerged from the brush like a spirit, a young woman Clayton recognized from the lodge. Nadira Mosi moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this terrain. Her own rifle held steady as she advanced. 3 against 1. Baraka sneered, though his eyes darted between Nadira and the surrounding brush, searching for others. 2. Clayton called out, finding his voice. He stepped forward to stand beside his jeep, making it clear he wouldn't back down. And we've already radioed your location. Nadira used their distraction to close the distance, her movements precise and practiced. I've been tracking you since you crossed the northern boundary, she told the poachers. Your trap lines are marked. The Rangers know every location. Clayton saw the calculation in Baraka's eyes, weighing options, measuring risks. The poacher's finger tightened on his trigger, but Nadira wasn't finished. She pulled something from her pocket and held it up, a small black device that blinked steadily. And this tracker has been broadcasting your position for the last hour. The younger poachers shifted nervously, and Clayton could see their resolve cracking. They were killers, yes, but opportunistic ones. A sure profit wasn't worth prison or, worse. Baraka, one of them muttered urgently. We should go. Now. For one terrible moment, Clayton thought the leader would shoot anyway, spite overwhelming sense. But survival instincts won out. With a curse, Baraka lowered his rifle. This isn't finished, he spat, backing away. His men followed, melting into the brush like shadows fleeing the dawn. Clayton's legs nearly gave out with relief. Thank you, he managed to say as Nadira approached. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold them off. You did well, she replied, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any remaining threat. Most tourists would have run at the first sign of trouble. She looked at him more closely. You're the American widower, yes? From the photography tour. Clayton nodded, surprised she remembered their brief interaction at the lodge. But before he could respond, a weak sound drew their attention back to the real crisis at hand. The leopardess lay where she had fallen, her breathing now sharp and irregular. In the growing morning light, Clayton could finally see what he'd missed before. A cruel metal wire cutting deep into her side, the flesh around it angry and swollen. Oh no, Nadira breathed, kneeling beside the great cat. Years of experience. Let her read the signs that Clayton's heart was still struggling to accept. This snare has been here for days. The infection. She trailed off, her hand hovering over the wound without touching. The leopardess's eyes found Clayton's again, but this time he understood the real message in that desperate gaze. She hadn't been asking him to save her. She'd known it was too late for that. She was asking him to save what mattered most. The cubs huddled against their mother's back, small and frightened, but alive. They were old enough to survive without milk, Nadira explained softly, but too young to fend for themselves. Without protection, they would soon follow their mother. We can't just let her suffer, Clayton said, his voice rough with emotion. He thought of Sarah's final days, of the mercy in accepting when the fight was over. Isn't there something we can do? Nadira nodded solemnly, reaching for her pack. I carry medicines for times like this. We can ease her passing. She prepared the injection with practiced hands. You did save her, you know. You gave her cubs a chance. Sometimes that's the most important thing we can do. Help life continue, even if we can't stop death. The leopardess didn't fight as Nadira administered the shot. Perhaps she understood, or perhaps she had simply reached the limit of her strength. Her eyes stayed fixed on her cubs as her breathing gradually slowed. Clayton found himself kneeling in the dirt beside her, his camera forgotten. He had come to Africa seeking distraction from his grief, trying to outrun the pain of loss. Instead, he had found himself facing it head-on, watching another life slip away. But this time something was different. This time, there was purpose in the pain and hope in what remained. The sun climbed higher over the savannah as they kept their vigil, bearing witness to both an ending and a beginning. The cubs would need protection, shelter, and a new kind of hope. As Clayton watched them, he felt something shift. Inside his heart, a familiar ache transforming into resolve. The morning sun cast long shadows across the savannah as the leopardess stirred, her movements growing weaker by the minute. Clayton watched, his heart heavy, as she gathered what remained of her strength. Her eyes, once fierce and wild, now held a different kind of intensity, one born of desperate maternal love. With trembling legs, she rose one final time. Her cubs huddled against her, confused and frightened by the morning's events. The mother's gaze locked onto Clayton's face, and in that moment, understanding passed between them. It was a look he knew all too well, the same one Sarah had given him in her final days, when she made him promise to keep living, to find purpose again. The leopardess moved with painful determination. Each step seemed to cost her dearly as she nudged her cubs, first one, then the other, toward Clayton's feet. The small creatures mewed in protest, trying to return to their mother's side. But she persisted until they stood trembling near the stranger she had chosen to trust. "Oh my God," Nadira whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "She's choosing." Before she could finish, the leopardess's legs buckled. She collapsed onto her side, her breathing ragged and shallow. The cubs tried to run back to her, but Clayton, moving on instinct, quickly shrugged off his photographer's coat and gathered them up. They were so small, so fragile, barely larger than house cats, their spotted fur still downy soft. The mother's eyes found Clayton one last time. In them, he saw not just a plea but a command: protect them, save them, let them live. Then those eyes, which had held his with such fierce intensity, slowly dimmed. Her chest rose and fell once more, and then she was gone. Clayton felt tears rolling down his cheeks, surprised by their suddenness. He hadn't cried since Sarah's funeral, had thought perhaps he'd used up all his tears. But here they were again, falling for another mother's sacrifice, another life cut short too soon. The cubs squirmed in his coat, their small bodies warm against his chest. One of them let out a pitiful mew that seemed to echo across the empty savannah. Clayton held them closer, trying to still their trembling with his own shaking hands. "Clayton," Nadira's urgent voice cut through his grief. "We cannot stay here. The poachers will return, and they will bring others." She was already scanning the horizon, her body tense with alertness. That was too easy. Baraka never gives up. So quickly. He's probably gathering reinforcements right now. She was right, of course. The poachers wouldn't abandon such valuable prey without a fight. The cubs represented thousands of dollars on the black market, alive for exotic pet traders, or dead for those who dealt in pelts and traditional medicines. The thought made Clayton's stomach turn. "What do we do?" he asked, surprised by the fierce protectiveness already growing in his chest. "Where can we take them?" Nadira shouldered her pack, her movements quick and decisive. "There's a wildlife sanctuary about 40 kilometers north of here. They have experience with orphaned cubs, proper facilities to care for them." She glanced at the dead leopardess, her expression softening for a moment. "We should cover her. She deserves that much dignity." Together, they gathered dry grass and branches, working quickly to conceal the mother's body. Clayton found himself whispering words of gratitude as they worked, thanking her for her trust, promising to honor it. The cubs watched from their makeshift nest in his coat, occasionally making small sounds of distress. "We'll have to take your vehicle," Nadira said, already moving toward the jeep. "Mine's hidden too far away, and we can't risk the time it would take to retrieve it." She pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen. "I'm alerting the sanctuary. They'll be ready when we arrive." Clayton carefully climbed into the passenger seat, cradling the cubs. They had settled somewhat, perhaps exhausted by the morning's events, perhaps simply resigned to their new reality. One of them pressed its tiny head against his chest, seeking comfort in his heartbeat. The gesture nearly undid him completely. "I know what you're thinking," Nadira said as she started the engine. "You're wondering if you can do this, if you're strong enough to be what they need." She glanced at him, her expression knowing. But strength isn't about not feeling fear or grief. It's about moving forward despite them. The Jeep lurched into motion, and Clayton instinctively tightened his hold on the precious bundle in his arms. He thought about the chain of events that had brought him here, his loss, his aimless wandering, and now this unexpected responsibility. The weight of the Leopardess's trust pressed on him, heavy but somehow not crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose. The cubs shifted in their sleep, two small hearts beating against his own. He remembered Sarah's last words to him. "Don't let grief be the end of your story, Clay. Let it be the beginning of something new." Looking down at the orphaned cubs, Clayton realized that perhaps this was what she had meant. Sometimes the most profound new beginnings came disguised as endings, and the deepest trust could be given without a single word. "We need to hurry," Nadira said, pressing down on the accelerator. "The road ahead won't be easy." The Jeep rattled over the uneven ground as Nadira steered them away from the main roads. Clayton's arms ached from holding the cubs steady, but he didn't dare loosen his grip. Every bump and turn sent a jolt of anxiety through him. The precious cargo in his arms seemed so fragile. "We can't take the direct route," Nadira explained, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape. "Baraka and his men will expect that. They know these lands as well as I do." She turned the wheel sharply, taking them through a patch of acacia trees. "We'll have to go the long way around." The cubs stirred in their makeshift nest, and Clayton adjusted his coat around them. Their spotted fur was still baby soft, their eyes huge and uncertain in their small faces. One of them let out a tiny whimper that squeezed at his heart. "Shoo," he whispered. "It's going to be okay." He wasn't sure if he was reassuring the cubs or himself that a sound in the distance made Nadira stiffen. The distinct rumble of engines carried across the savannah. "They're moving faster than I expected," she muttered, turning off their path and into denser brush. The vegetation scraped against the Jeep's sides like desperate fingers that Clayton's pulse quickened. "How many do you think there are?" "Baraka usually works with a crew of 5 or 6, she replied, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But he has connections. He could have called in others." She glanced at the cubs. "Those two represent a lot of money to people like him." The Jeep burst through the brush into a shallow riverbed. Nadira killed the engine immediately, letting momentum carry them behind a cluster of rocks. They sat in tense silence as the sound of engines grew louder, then gradually faded in a different direction. "We can't stay here long," Nadira said, already reaching for her water bottle. She handed it to Clayton. "Try to get them to drink, eh? Little. They're probably dehydrated." Clayton's hands shook as he attempted to drip water into the cubs' mouths. His mind wandered to Sarah, remembering how she'd helped him nurse a sick kitten back to health years ago. "Come on, little ones," he murmured, relief flooding through him as they began to lap at the water. "You're good with them," Nadira observed, her expression softening for a moment. Then her head snapped up, alert. "We need to move. Now." They continued their journey, taking paths that seemed random to Clayton, but which Nadira navigated with confidence. The landscape changed around them. Open savanna giving way to patches of woodland, rocky outcrops rising like ancient sentinels. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every rustle of grass signaled potential danger. "How much further?" Clayton asked, trying to keep the worry from his voice as one of the cubs began to cry softly. "About 20 kilometers as the crow flies," Nadira replied. "But we can't go straight there. We need to." She cut off abruptly, throwing the Jeep into reverse as gunshots cracked through the air. The vehicle lurched backward, tires spinning in the loose soil. Clayton curled his body around the cubs, heart hammering. More shots rang out. Closer this time. Through the windshield, he caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the trees ahead. "Hold on," Nadira shouted, spinning the wheel. The Jeep fishtailed, then shot forward down a steep embankment Clayton hadn't even noticed. They bounced violently, and he struggled to keep the cubs secure. Their frightened cries pierced the air. "I'm sorry," he told them, feeling utterly helpless. "I'm so sorry." Doubt crashed over him. What had he been thinking, taking on this responsibility? He was just a retired teacher, a grieving widower who couldn't even put his own life back together. How could he possibly protect these vulnerable creatures? As if sensing his thoughts, Nadira spoke up. "You're doing exactly what you should be, Clayton. That mother chose you for a reason." She navigated around a fallen tree with expert precision. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply not give up. Her words settled something in Clayton's chest. He looked down at the cubs, seeing not just their vulnerability now, but their potential. These small lives represented hope for their species, for this place, and maybe even for him. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt paralyzing. They drove on, Nadira's knowledge of the terrain keeping them one step ahead of their pursuers. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down mercilessly. The cubs had fallen into an exhausted sleep, their tiny bodies warm against Clayton's chest. Every kilometer brought them closer to safety, but also seemed to stretch the tension tighter. There, Nadira pointed to a distant line of hills. The sanctuary is just beyond those rises. We're going to make it. She allowed herself a small smile. You're doing well, Clayton. Better than most would in your situation. Clayton nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The weight of the cubs in his arms felt different now, not just a burden of responsibility, but a privilege. A chance to help write a new story, not just for these orphaned creatures, but for himself as well. The jeep pressed on across the rugged landscape, carrying its precious cargo toward hope. Thunder rumbled overhead as dark clouds gathered, turning the afternoon sky an ominous gray. Clayton held the cubs closer, feeling their tiny hearts racing against his chest. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the jeep's windshield. This storm will make tracking harder for them, Nadira said, gripping the steering wheel tighter as she navigated the increasingly treacherous terrain. But it also makes our path more dangerous. As if to emphasize her point, the jeep slid sideways in the fresh mud. Nadira corrected quickly, but Clayton's stomach lurched at the close call. The rain intensified, coming down in sheets now. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening thunder that made the cubs whimper. Shoo, it's okay, Clayton whispered, though his own nerves were fraying. Through the rain-streaked windows, he caught glimpses of their pursuers' headlights, weaving through the landscape behind them. They're trying to force us toward the ravine, Nadira shouted over the storm. We need to. Her words cut off as the jeep hit a patch of deep mud. The vehicle spun violently, tires finding no purchase in the slick earth. Time seemed to slow as they skidded toward the edge. Clayton saw Nadira's hands wrestling with the wheel, felt the cubs pressing against him in terror. Then they were falling, the world tumbling around them as the jeep rolled down the steep incline. Metal screamed against rock. Glass shattered. Clayton curled himself around the cubs, protecting them with his body as they were thrown about the cabin. When they finally came to rest, the jeep lay on its side at the bottom of the ravine, rain pouring in through the broken windows. Nadira, Clayton called out, tasting blood from where he'd bit his lip. Nadira, I'm here, she groaned from the driver's seat. The cubs. Clayton checked them quickly, scared but alive. You're bleeding. He noticed the gash on her forehead, dark blood mixing with the rain. Just a cut, she said, wincing as she tried to move. But my ankle, I think it's sprained. Can you reach the emergency kit? Clayton managed to retrieve the red box from behind his seat, along with a flare gun and some supplies that had scattered in the crash. Above them, lightning illuminated the ravine walls, too steep and slick to climb in this weather. We'll have to wait out the night, Nadira said, accepting the bandage Clayton offered for her head. The poachers won't risk the ravine in this storm, but she glanced into the darkness beyond the jeep. We're not the only predators out here. As if on cue, a low growl echoed through the rain. Clayton's hand tightened on the flare gun. The cubs pressed closer to him, trembling. Save the flares, Nadira advised. We'll need them when they get closer. She pulled herself into a better position, grimacing at the pain in her ankle. We should take turns watching. For hours each. The night stretched endlessly. Clayton fired their first flare when yellow eyes appeared in the darkness. A pride of lions, drawn by the scent of the cubs. The red light sent them retreating, but they didn't go far. More eyes appeared throughout the hours. Hyenas, leopards, creatures, hunting in the storm. Each flare bought them time, but their supply was limited. Clayton found himself counting them obsessively. 6 left. 5. 4. The cubs slept fitfully, whimpering in their dreams. I never told you why I do this, Nadira said during one of their quiet moments, her voice barely audible above the rain. My father was a ranger. He died trying to stop poachers, just like the ones chasing us. She touched one of the sleeping cubs gently. Every animal we save is a victory against them, a way to honor him. Clayton thought of Sarah then, how she'd always taught him that love meant taking action, even when you were afraid. Your father would be proud, he said softly. Another growl, closer this time. Clayton raised the flare gun, his hands steady. Now, despite his exhaustion, the red light revealed a huge male lion, barely 20 feet away. The beast retreated, but its roar echoed off the ravine walls, a promise to return. They took turns dozing fitfully, never fully sleeping. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating their precarious shelter in stark flashes. Each hour brought new threats, new eyes in the darkness, new reasons to fire their dwindling supply of flares. Dawn seemed an eternity away as they huddled in their broken jeep, surrounded by dangers on all sides. The cubs had grown quiet, as if understanding the need for silence. Clayton felt every ache from the crash, every tremor of exhaustion, but he kept his grip firm on both the cubs and the flare gun. They were running out of options, but they weren't beaten yet. As another set of eyes appeared in the darkness, Clayton raised the flare gun once more, determined to protect their precious cargo until morning light could show them a way out of this ravine. Through the endless night, Clayton's arms ached from holding the cubs, but he refused to let them go. The rain drummed against the broken jeep, creating a rhythm that matched his weary heartbeat. Every hour felt like 3 as he and Nadira took turns watching, their flare gun ready for the constant parade of predators drawn to their shelter. During one of his watches, the smaller cub stirred in his arms, letting out a tiny mewl that reminded him so much of the stray cat Sarah had once nursed back to health. The memory hit him like a physical blow. Sarah in their kitchen, patiently feeding the injured animal with a dropper, her gentle voice coaxing it to live. "You always were the stronger one," he whispered, both to his wife's memory and to the cub now looking up at him with trusting eyes. "I didn't know how to go on without you. Still don't most days." Nadira shifted in her seat, trying to find a more comfortable position for her injured ankle. "Who are you talking to?" she asked softly. Clayton hadn't realized he'd spoken aloud. "My wife," he admitted. "Sarah. She died 8 months ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Nadira said, her voice gentle in the darkness. "Was that why you came to Kenya? To escape?" "I thought so at first." Clayton fired another flare as yellow eyes appeared in the brush, sending a hyena pack scattering. "But now I wonder if she led me here somehow. Sarah always said everything happens for a reason." The larger cub pressed its wet nose against his hand, and Clayton found himself smiling despite their dire situation. These cubs needed him, just as that stray had needed Sarah. For the first time since her death, he felt truly useful, truly present in the moment instead of lost in grief. Nadira watched him with the cubs, her expression thoughtful. "When I first met you at the lodge, I saw only sadness in your eyes," she said. "But now I see something else, something stronger." "I feel it too," Clayton admitted. "These cubs, they've given me a purpose I didn't know I was missing." He adjusted his grip as another round of thunder shook the ravine. Sarah would have loved them. The night wore on, each hour marked by the dwindling supply of flares and the constant threats lurking in the darkness. Clayton found himself sharing more memories of Sarah, her laugh, her passion for teaching, her unwavering belief in doing what was right. Nadira listened, offering stories of her own father in return. "He taught me to track animals when I was just a child," she said, during one particularly dark hour. Said understanding them was the first step to protecting them. She touched her injured ankle gently. "He would have done exactly what you did today, stopping to help that leopardess." "I'm not brave like your father," Clayton protested. "I was terrified. Still am." "That's what makes it brave," Nadira insisted. "Doing what's right despite the fear." She studied him in the dim light. "You're stronger than you think, Clayton Harlow." A distant engine sound made them both tense. Headlights swept across the ravine walls, the poachers searching. Clayton held the cubs closer, feeling their rapid heartbeats against his chest. They had only 2 flares left, and dawn was still hours away. "They won't give up," Nadira said grimly. "Those cubs are worth too much money to them." "Then we won't give up either," Clayton replied, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. He thought of Sarah again, how she'd fought until the very end, never losing her compassion even in her final days. We'll protect them, whatever it takes. Nadira nodded, checking their remaining supplies. We'll need to be ready when they come. No more running. As they prepared for what might be their final stand, Clayton felt a strange calm settle over him. The cubs trusted him completely, just as that stray had trusted Sarah. He couldn't let them down. For the first time since losing his wife, he felt fully present in his own skin, driven by a purpose larger than his grief. The night's darkest hours stretched before them, filled with the sounds of approaching danger. Clayton and Nadira positioned themselves as best they could in the crashed jeep, weapons ready. The cubs huddled between them, quiet and alert, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "Sarah," Clayton whispered to himself, "help me be strong enough for this." As if in answer, the smaller cub pressed its head against his hand, purring softly. In that moment, Clayton knew with certainty that he would do whatever it took to protect these innocent lives. His grief hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into something else, a source of strength rather than weakness. The poachers' voices grew closer. Clayton and Nadira exchanged determined looks, their resolve matching the thunder that still rolled overhead. They were trapped, injured, and nearly out of options, but they were far from beaten. Whatever came with the dawn, they would face it. Together, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in pale streaks as engines rumbled closer. Clayton's heart hammered against his ribs as headlights swept across the ravine walls. The poachers had returned, just as Nadira predicted. Their voices carried through the darkness, rough and determined. "This is our last flare," Clayton whispered, gripping the signal gun with trembling fingers. The cubs pressed closer to him, sensing his tension. "We have to make it count." Nadira nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the ridge above. "Wait for them. To get closer, we need maximum visibility." Footsteps crunched on loose rocks. A beam of light cut through the pre-dawn gloom, searching. Clayton held his breath as Baraka's scarred face appeared at the ravine's edge, his rifle glinting dully. "We know you're down there," Baraka called out, his voice echoing. "Make it easy on yourselves. Those cubs are worth more than your lives." Clayton's mind flashed to the leopardess's final moments, her trust in him absolute. He thought of Sarah, who had never backed down from doing what was right. The weight of the signal gun felt heavy in his hand. The poachers began descending, loose dirt and stones cascading down the ravine walls. Clayton counted 4 men, all armed. They moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was cornered. "Now," Nadira hissed. "Do it now." Clayton raised the flare gun high and pulled the trigger. The projectile screamed skyward, bursting into brilliant red light that illuminated the entire ravine like a second sunrise. The sudden glare revealed more than just the poachers' positions. It exposed 3 ranger vehicles that had been quietly approaching from the east. Shouts of surprise erupted as the rangers announced their presence, megaphones crackling with commands to surrender. The poachers scattered, but they were caught between the steep ravine walls and the advancing authorities. Gunfire exploded above them. Clayton covered the cubs with his body as bullets ricocheted off rocks. Nadira pressed against the jeep's frame, her eyes wide but determined. The firefight was brief but intense, the sound of it echoing through the valley like thunder. Then, suddenly, silence fell. "Clear," a ranger's voice called out. "We have them contained." Clayton raised his head cautiously. Above them, he could see the poachers being handcuffed and led away. Baraka's face was twisted with fury as rangers secured. His weapons and rights were red. Relief flooded through Clayton's body, leaving him weak. The cubs, sensing the danger had passed, began to purr softly against his chest. Nadira reached over and squeezed his hand, her smile tired but triumphant. Rangers rappelled down to their position, medical kits at the ready. As they were checked for injuries, Clayton learned that Nadira's distress call from the previous day had not gone unheard. The rangers had been tracking both them and the poachers throughout the night, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We've been after Baraka's operation for months," the lead ranger explained as they were helped from the ravine. "This time, we have enough evidence to shut them down for good." Standing on solid ground again, Clayton watched as the poachers were loaded into vehicles. Justice had been served, but the victory felt bittersweet. He thought of the leopardess, her sacrifice, ensuring her cub's survival. The weight of her trust still rested on his shoulders, a responsibility he now understood he had been meant to carry. The sun finally crested the horizon, warming his face. For the first time since the chase began, Clayton felt the crushing tension release from his body. The cubs were safe. The poachers were caught. Yet as he held the orphaned cubs close, he knew their journey was far from over. The morning sun cast long shadows across the savannah as Clayton made his way back to where their journey had begun. The rangers' vehicles lined the dusty track, their radios crackling with coordination efforts. But Clayton's attention focused solely on the still form lying in the grass. The leopardess who had changed everything. He knelt beside her, his weathered hand hovering over her spotted fur. In death, she looked peaceful, freed from the cruel steel snare that had sealed her fate. The morning light caught the silver at her whiskers, making them shine like delicate threads. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" Clayton whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You chose us. You trusted us with everything that mattered to you." Nadira approached quietly, standing beside him. "In all my years as a guide, I've never seen anything like it." She saw something in you, Clayton, something worth believing in. The cubs were being examined by the reserve veterinarians nearby, their small bodies wrapped in warm blankets. Their eyes, so like their mothers, watched everything with innocent curiosity. They were survivors now, carrying their mother's legacy forward. "Will they be okay?" Clayton asked, though he already knew the answer. The reserve was one of the best in Kenya, with experienced staff and secure facilities. "They'll have everything they need," Nadira assured him. "The reserve has successfully raised orphan cubs before. These little ones will grow strong, just as their mother would have wanted." Clayton touched the leopardess's fur finally, a gentle goodbye. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me that life doesn't end with loss. That trust and love can bloom, even in the hardest moments." Standing slowly, his joints stiff from the night's ordeal, Clayton watched as rangers carefully lifted the leopardess's body. She would be buried with dignity, her sacrifice honored. The poachers' snares and weapons would be destroyed, their operation dismantled piece by piece. The cubs mewed softly as veterinarians prepared them for transport. Clayton approached them one last time, reaching out to stroke their spotted fur. Their purrs vibrated against his hand, a sound of contentment and trust that brought tears to his eyes. "You know," Nadira said softly, "the reserve always needs experienced volunteers. People who understand these animals, who care about protecting them." Clayton looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since their ordeal began. Her eyes held warmth and understanding, an invitation to something he'd thought forever lost. "I was a teacher back home," he said, the words coming easier than expected. "Before Sarah, before everything changed. I thought I'd never find purpose again." Nadira smiled. "Sometimes purpose finds us instead, like a mother leopard choosing a stranger to save her cubs." The memory of Sarah didn't hurt quite as sharply. Now, instead, Clayton felt her presence like a gentle warmth, supporting his steps towards something new. She would have loved this place, these creatures, this mission. She would have wanted him to live fully again. "Maybe," Clayton said, watching. As the cubs were carefully loaded into the reserve's vehicle, "I could stay for a while. Help with the cubs' rehabilitation. Document their progress." "I think that's exactly what their mother would have wanted," Nadira replied, her smile brightening. "And I know some excellent trails that need experienced guides." The morning air felt lighter somehow, filled with possibility. Clayton's camera, still hanging faithfully around his neck, caught the light. He realized he hadn't taken a single photo since finding the leopardess, but now his fingers itched to capture the cubs' journey, to tell their story to the world. As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, Clayton felt something shift inside him, a space opening up where grief had lived so long. It wasn't gone, would never be gone completely, but now it shared room with purpose, with connection, with the promise of new beginnings. The cub's soft mews carried on the morning breeze, a reminder of trust freely given and purpose found in unexpected places. Beside him, Nadira's presence offered friendship and understanding, a bridge between his old life and whatever lay ahead. For the first time since Sarah's death, Clayton felt truly alive, aware of all the possibilities each new dawn could bring. The leopardess's final gift hadn't just been the saving of her cubs, it had been the saving of him, too. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, Don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.